if you have your Bibles with you, I would invite you to be turning to a very familiar verse, a very familiar passage, Job chapter 14 and verse 1. Job 14 and verse 1. While you're turning there, allow me to extend a special invitation, if I may. We're going to be in our Wednesday evening study, and it's already been mentioned, starting in the second Wednesday of March, a new examination. We're going to be studying the book of Daniel, and I taught the book of Daniel about 3 years ago, but we're going to take a different focus this time, and we're going to use the book of Daniel as a vehicle to talk about some of the toughest and most challenging topics that we have to face nowadays as Christians. So it seems to me, for example, that the two watershed moral issues of our day pertain to life and sexuality. Life, when does it begin? Abortion, and when does it end? And then secondly, when you talk about sexuality, you think about homosexuality and gender confusion and all those things that have been in the news lately. And it seems to me that Daniel is the right place to go in the Bible to get a biblical view of how people of God should respond to those questions. Because if you think about it, Daniel and Shadrach and Meshach, they were in very secular societies, weren't they? They were transported to Babylon, and then you think about the Medo-Persian Empire afterwards, and those were very secular societies. And I'm sure that the kind of challenges that they faced are somewhat reminiscent of the kind of challenges that we face today. And so we're going to try to use them as a vehicle to help us understand how we should respond. But this afternoon, we're going to be talking about how to handle the big hurts in life, how to handle the big hurts in life. And I'll tell you right now, you don't have to live very long, do you, on this earth to know what disappointments and heartaches and challenges and grief are. If you've got any years on you at all, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And if you don't have any big hurts, they're coming. I'll just say that right up front. And it's a very common experience for all those who live on this earth. You're waving at me and you're saying my lapel mic is not working. Is that right? Okay. So John Haller, would you mind helping me out there a little bit and grab that? Can y'all hear me through this okay? We doing okay on that? All right. So if you take a look at Job 14 and verse 1, man who is born a woman is a few days and full of trouble. And I'll tell y'all right now that the older I get, the truer that verse becomes. How about y'all? And, I have more examples in my life that prove the truth of that verse. And so this evening, we're going to be talking about the big hurts in life. And when I talk about the big hurts in life, as I said, you're going to experience them. And it may include such things as the loss of a spouse. Sometimes that happens. And we've seen an example of that just in the last couple of days. You think about a catastrophic illness or an accident. And if you live long enough, I had an old friend in Kerrville who said, if you live long enough, you're going to get a lot wrong with you. And he told me that when I was about 30, and I didn't know what he meant, but now I'm 64 and I know exactly what he meant, right? And you think about the unfaithfulness or the rebellion of somebody that you love or that you trusted. I tell folks I think family situations are the hardest to handle. Would you all agree with that statement? And again, if you get to be any age at all, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Sometimes people suffer financial ruin or the loss of a job, maybe a job that they've had for a long time, for 20 years or more. Sometimes you experience the early death of a loved one, seem to die out of turn. I was thinking about Robin and her birth mother, and Robin has already lived nearly 20 years longer than her birth mother did. And you think, well, where's the justice in that? Why shouldn't a godly person live a long time? And the ungodly should be the one who passed quickly, but that's not always the way that it works out. And you can have some big disappointments in life that way. Sometimes you have a special dream, something that you've always been shooting for, something that was really important to you, something that you always thought you would be able to do, and for whatever reason it came crashing down around you. So I'm talking about the big hurts in life, and I'm talking about the ones that leave you tied in knots, and the ones that steal your sleep and your joy, and the ones that make the day short but the nights long, and the ones where you wish you could crawl in the hole and just pull the dirt in after you. And I'll tell you all, perhaps the hardest lesson I learned as a gospel preacher is that everybody eventually has big hurts. And I want you right now to do something with me. I want you to pick out the one person here this evening that you think has everything together and everything is working smoothly and they don't seem to have any big problems, and life is all puppy dog tails and cotton candy and that sort of thing. I'm here to tell you as a gospel preacher, they have at least as many problems as you do. And they may not be the same kind of problems that you have, but everybody has those big hurts that they have to wrestle with. John, does the Bible say anything about dealing with those kind of problems? Family problems, financial problems, health problems. What does the Bible say that can help me with that? I had a fella tell me one time, he said, sometimes I wish I was just a little boy again. He said where the biggest problem was a skinned knee. He said skinned knees heal up faster than broken hearts. And that's exactly right. And so those feelings of overwhelming sadness and overwhelming heartache and overwhelming grief are common to all of mankind. And I think that's the first point we need to focus on. And I doubt that anybody here this evening could claim to have suffered more than Job did. We've already read a little bit from Job this afternoon. But you think about everything that happened to Job. If you're familiar with the story, what happened there? His servants were killed. Think about that. The oxen and the camels and the donkeys were stolen. And the sheep were killed. And he had, how many children did he have? He had 10 children, had 7 sons and 3 daughters, and they were all killed at the same time. Parents, let that soak in for just a moment. And then he lost his health, and then he had that wonderful wife who said, why don't you just curse God and die? Now, I want you to, and I think she'd lost 10 children too, right? I can kind of understand the way she was feeling. But what I'm saying to you is his family was gone, his wealth was gone, his health was gone, his wife was tormenting him. What would that be like? Well, that to me is almost unimaginable. And to have all those things happen to you at once, to have all those things happen to you in succession, it seems to me that would be almost unbearable heartache. So regardless of what's happened in your life, can you say that you've had it worse than Job had it? And did Job have feelings of despair and despondency? Did he have a rough time? He did. He remained faithful, but it doesn't mean that he didn't have some difficult times. Colby already did a good job of reading some verses on that. But allow me to give you just a couple of more. Turn over to Job chapter 3. This is going to be Job chapter 3 and verse 1. And Carter, if I don't move around much, it's okay with this one microphone? Is that right? Okay. And if I start wandering, y'all wave at me, all right? So Job chapter 3 and verse 1. After this, Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth. He says, man, it'd been better if I hadn't been born. All this happens to him, and he's sad that he ever drew a breath. Have you ever been at a time like that in your life? Well, maybe. But think about all that had happened to him. And Job spoke, and he said, may the day perish on which I was born. It was a sad day whenever I was born. And the night in which it was said, a male child is conceived, may that day be darkness. May God above not seek it, nor the light shine upon it. May darkness and the shadow of death claim it. May a cloud settle on it. May the blackness of the day terrify it. And so think about the despair that he felt. Yes, he remained faithful, but don't you ever get the idea that he wasn't feeling any pain or that he knew everything. He didn't know how the story is going to turn out, did he? He didn't know. We know what happens at the end of Job. He didn't know. Did he know about the situation between God and Satan and why this came about? Did he know about any of that? No. All he knows is his health is gone, and his family is gone, and his wealth is gone, and now he's in despair. So he knew exactly what it was like. But I'm here to tell you that Job was not the only Bible character who knew despair. If y'all were preaching this sermon and I asked you to think of other Bible characters who faced some big hurts, who faced some despondency and despair, which ones would come to your mind? Who would you call out? Well, I'm thinking, and I guess each of us might have somebody different in mind, but I'm thinking about Jeremiah, the prophet Jeremiah. Love to study Jeremiah. He's often called the weeping prophet, and he had a lot of reason to weep. He'd be preaching, he'd go out and he'd start preaching and prophesying, and his own people would throw him into a pit. His own people wanted to kill him. Can you imagine such a thing? And he'd say, God, I'm too young. I'm too young to do this. And God say, no, you're not. Go ahead, go keep preaching. And he was mistreated, it seems like, just about every step of the way. And I want y'all to notice something that Jeremiah said in Jeremiah chapter 9 in verse 2. Jeremiah chapter 9 in verse 2. And I want you to see if you've ever said something like this in your life. See if these aren't familiar words to you. Jeremiah 9 in verse 2, he says, oh, that I had in the wilderness a lodging place for travelers, that I might leave my people and go from them. Have you ever said, I just wish I had a little place out in the country I could go to and get away from it all? Have you ever been tempted to say something like that? Everybody here has had that experience. And he goes ahead and he says, for they are all adulterers, an assembly of treacherous men. So the point I'm making is that Jeremiah knew exactly what it was to be in despair. And he was a great man. That gives me hope. Nobody's stronger than Jeremiah. Jeremiah could feel that way. It's okay for John Evans to feel that way sometimes. But I tell you right now, he's not the only one. And you know what I think? Sometimes the hardest hurts that we have to deal with is when we realize it's our own fault, that our own sinful habits. Conscience there's nothing that weighs more than a heavy conscience. And sometimes you recognize it's your own behavior that has caused a lot of the problems. And I think about David, for example. If you take a look over in 2 Samuel chapter 18, think about everything that happened to David because of the sin with Bathsheba and against Uriah the Hittite. Think about the death of that innocent child. Think about his own son wanting to kill him. Think about Absalom stealing the hearts of the people away and then chasing after his daddy with the intent of killing him. And then Absalom dies. And what has to be in David's mind? I'll tell you what, if as daddy, I'd be thinking all this happened because I goofed up. Because of my own sinful habits. That's why this happened. That's the way I'd be thinking about it. And I think that's what David was thinking. 2 Samuel 18 and verse 33, then the king was deeply moved and went up to the chamber over the gate and wept. And as he wept, he said, oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, if only I had died in your place. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son. I think he meant every word. I think he meant every word. Now, have we gone through something like that? Maybe. But you stop and realize that lots of Bible characters, men who were admirable, women who were great women, had to deal with pain and suffering in their life. How about Joseph? I know Tyler had a sermon not too long ago about Joseph, betrayed by his own brothers. Now, some of that's Joseph's fault. Your siblings don't like it when you start bragging to them, right? But to have your own brothers betray you and sell you into slavery, can you imagine what that would have felt like? And then the butler and the baker forget about it. Remember all of that? Potiphar's wife, and what she did. Think about all of that. Think about the disappointment, the challenges, the heartache. Did God know how to bless him, by the way, through all that? Didn't he? But man, when you're in the big middle of it, it doesn't feel that way, does it? And then, if I can return to David for just a moment, you think about that relationship with Bathsheba. and then the death of that innocent child. And the thought in his mind had to be, it's my fault, it's my fault, it's my fault. 2 Samuel 12 in verse 23, David says, in thinking about that child, he says, I shall go to him, but he shall not return to me. That was what was in his mind. So the first point I'm asking y'all to think about with me is the Bible lets us know that disappointments and heartaches are a part of this life. They are. You know, when God made the earth, when he created Adam and Eve, made everything in the earth, it was good. It was the way that it should be. God pronounced it good. But then sin entered the world. And because sin entered the world, then there are going to be some bad things that happen. Some of them are just plain accidents. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But then some are the result of sinful behavior. In that sense, we live in a broken world because sin is in the world. The devil is the god of this world. And so disappointment and heartaches and hardships are going to be a part of it. So what is the Bible's recipe for handling the big hurts? Now, I just give you 3 points to think about. I believe this is what the Bible teaches us. First of all, you have to remember that you are not your own. Now, I've got to kind of explain that to you and flesh that out a little bit, but this really is the most important point of all. What I'm telling you is that God can heal a broken heart, but you have to be willing to give him all the pieces. You have to be willing to give him all of the pieces. God may very well use the hardships and the heartaches and the disappointments in our lives to shape us for even greater service in the kingdom. I believe this. Even greater service in the kingdom if we will just allow him to. You know, in 1 Corinthians 6, verses 19 and 20, 1 Corinthians 6, 19 and 20, Paul reminds the Corinthian brethren, he says, you are not your own. You were bought with a price. And if you want to know the best way to get over the hardships and the heartaches in life, the best way to get over them is to remember that you belong to God and to get busy and serve God, serve your fellow man, serve God, empty yourself of yourself, and put God absolutely first in your life. And friends, you will be able to deal with a hardship and heartache because it's not about us. It's about our service to God. Have you ever thought about the Apostle Paul for a moment? I mean, think about what he had to do. Think about on the road to Damascus when the Lord appears to him, and Paul realizes, Paul realizes that everything he's done in life and what he stood for has been 100% wrong. What would that be? I mean, that'd be like somebody taking a 2x4 and hitting you upside of the head. You know, you thought you were supposed to be persecuting Christians? I'm telling you, I'm Christ, and what you're doing is wrong. And everything you have stood for, you know how you encouraged people to stone Stephen? That was exactly wrong. You know your trip here to Damascus? That is exactly wrong. You know what you thought was right? That is exactly wrong. Everything that you've been doing and standing for, to a large measure, was wrong. Now, how are you going to live with that? I mean, he's a grown man. How do you get past that? How do you deal with the heartache and the disappointment of imprisoning Christians, of putting Christians even to death? How would you begin to deal with that? I think the answer is that Paul got busy serving God and used the hardships and the heartaches that were largely the result of his own behavior. He allowed God to use those things to shape him for greater service in the kingdom. Does anybody here doubt that Paul became a better servant because he realized what he had done wrong before? Does anybody here doubt that? Friends, did you know you can do the same thing? God invites us to do the same thing. I'm thinking right now about Philippians, and this is going to be Philippians chapter 3, 13 and 14. Philippians 3, 13 and 14, where Paul, very familiar verses, says, "Brethren, I do not count myself to have apprehended, but one thing I do, forgetting those things which are behind." No, you can't do that. Not really. What do you mean? What do you mean, forgetting those things that are behind? Well, I think he tells us what he means by the rest of the verse. "And reaching forward to those things which are ahead, I press toward the goal for the prize of the upward call of God in Christ Jesus." Paul emptied himself of self. He got busy serving God. He realized he was God's man. He realized what he had done wrong could shape him, if he allowed it, to even greater service in the kingdom. And he got busy and did that, and that allowed him to deal with his past life. I just believe that with all of my heart. I think that's what the Bible is telling us. Earth is not heaven. All Christians are going to be facing trying times. Will those disappointments break us, or will they shape us for greater service? You know, heat can burn down a house, but it can also temper steel, can't it? Same thing, burn down the house or temper steel. What's it going to do for you? And think about everything, since we're talking about Paul, think about everything that he experienced as a Christian. What would allow you to go through the things that are mentioned in 2 Corinthians chapter 11? I'll go ahead and read this to you. 2 Corinthians chapter 11 and verse 23, where he talks about his experiences once he became a Christian. 2 Corinthians 11:23. "Are they ministers of Christ? I speak as a fool. I am more in labors." Take a look at it now. He says, "I am more. I'm more in labors more abundant, in stripes above measure, in prisons more frequently, in deaths often. For the Jews, from the Jews 5 times I received 40 stripes minus 1. You ever been beaten 195 times? I'm not talking about whipping. I'm talking about an out-and-out beating. Has that ever happened to you? 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I've been in the deep, in journeys often, in perils of water, perils of robber, perils of my own countrymen, perils of the Gentile, perils of the city." He goes on talking. What would allow you to endure that? I'll tell you what. When you empty self of self and give yourself over to God and realize that you're not your own, you were bought with a price, then, brothers and sisters, you can deal with just about anything. Is there any doubt that Paul's trials equipped him for greater service? I was thinking about, I remember Jim Neff talking about this, the nearly impossible situation of Hosea. Have y'all thought about Hosea much? And Hosea, here's this prophet, and to show the unfaithfulness of Israel, God told Hosea to take a wife of harlotry. Some scholars suggest that perhaps Gomer was a temple prostitute of Baal. Maybe that's what she was. And so God, in order to illustrate the unfaithfulness of Israel, said, "I want you, Hosea, to take a wife of harlotry." Now, fellas, how would you like to bring her home to the parents? All right? I'd be saying, no, God, nope, not going to do that. And not only that, but God says she's going to be unfaithful to you too. And not only that, but he says, you're going to have children of harlotry. And not only that, she's going to leave you, and she's going to become a slave to her lover, and then you're going to have to buy her back as a slave. Yeah, I'm signing up for that mission. How about you? No, God, no. Not me. You got the wrong fella. You think that was tough on Hosea? How does a fella deal with that? I think he deals with that by realizing that he's not his own, that he's God's man. That he's God's man. And God could equip him to do what needed to be done. I just believe that with all my heart. Second point I'm going to ask y'all to think about this evening. I think I think it's a choice you make. You just have to make a determination not to let the devil win. In other words, you have to say, regardless of what happens, Satan, you are not having my soul. I don't care what happens. There's one thing you're not getting, and that's the most important thing I have, and that's my soul, and that's not up for sale. It doesn't care I don't care what happens to me. You're not getting that. Many unfortunate things, and some things are just pure accidents in life. Ecclesiastes 9:11 talks about time and chance. Time and chance happen to them all. The devil will use the heartaches and the hardships of life to try to rob you of your faith, and you have to be prepared for that. You have to be ready to deal with that, because the devil's going to use every opportunity he can. You know, we started out this afternoon in the book of Job, so let's go back for a moment and just remember what Job 1 in the last verse of Job chapter 1 says. In all this, Job did not sin nor charge God with wrong. Did he despair? Did he get disappointed? Absolutely he did. But what does it say? He did not sin, and he did not charge God with wrong. You know, James chapter 4 verses 7 and 8 says, draw near to God, and what? If you draw near to God, he'll draw near to you. You know, if you reject the devil will leave you. You draw close to God, reject the devil, get near to God, get away from the devil, and God will help you. And I think it comes down to a choice. That's a no matter what. No matter what happens in my life, I'm not going to let the devil win. I made that decision. How about you? Have y'all made that decision? Doesn't matter what happens. Robin and I are not going to let the devil win. It's a choice that you make. And then finally, last point this evening, I think we have to remember how important it is to stick close to Christians in trying to. I've noticed when folks go through hard times, a lot of times what happens to their church attendance? What happens a lot of times? I mean, the very time when they need to be close to Christians, what do? Where'd that fella go? You have to stick close to Christians and remember the power of prayer. When you're really hurting, you need the help and the support and the comfort of those who will encourage you to remain faithful. I don't know what it's like to be in prison. I've visited some folks in jail, but I've never been in jail myself. And just hearing those iron doors, that's enough to keep me being a law-abiding citizen, all right? I don't know what it's like to be in prison, but the Apostle Paul did. He was in prison. And you know, when you read the Philippian letter, he's in prison, but what is he thinking about when he's in prison? Who does he want to be with? He wants to be with Christians. He talks about how much he loves the Philippian brethren, how he's longing to be with them. You going through a hard time, this is where you need to be. You need to be close to Christians. You need to be with your fellow brothers and sisters. There are some people who know how to light up a room just by being in it. Just by being in it. I have some folks that when I'm feeling down or blue, I just hang around them because they can smile. They know how to encourage you with their eyes. They got that body language working that allows them to encourage others. That's a beautiful thing. That's a beautiful thing. In fact, 1 Thessalonians 5 and verse 11 says that it's a command to comfort each other. It's given as an imperative. Comfort each other. You comfort each other. Stick close to Christians. Give your cares over to God. Philippians 4 and verse 6. All of the cares of your heart. Philippians 4 and 6. All of the cares of your heart. You need to lay at God's feet. When I'm feeling low, as I said, there are some Christians who can lift my spirits just by the sound of their voice and the smile on their face. We need that, don't we? Sometimes you just need somebody to cry with or to put an arm around your shoulder. No one does that better than a Christian. Nobody does that better than a Christian. So I'm going to repeat something I said earlier. God can heal a broken heart, but you have to be willing to give him all the pieces. You have to be willing to give him all the pieces. Psalm 147 in verse 3 says, he heals the brokenhearted and he binds up their wounds. What a beautiful verse. He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. Psalm 147 verse 3. 2 Corinthians 1 in verse 3 says, blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and God of all comfort. And would y'all allow me to read, and I'm going to go ahead and turn to this passage. I would invite you to do the same. We'll use this for our last verse this afternoon. If you take a look over in the 27th Psalm, so this is going to be the 27th Psalm, and pick up the reading in verse 12. Psalm 27, in verse 12, do not deliver me to the will of my adversaries, for false witnesses have risen against me, and such as breathe out violence. I would have lost heart unless I had believed that I would see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. And then this beautiful verse at the very end of the chapter, wait on the Lord. Be of good courage, and he will strengthen your heart. Wait, I say, on the Lord. I believe those verses, don't you? I believe what those verses are saying. And God never promised to protect us from all earthly trouble. We live in a broken world. There is going to be trouble along the way. But brothers and sisters, God does promise to deliver us through our troubles. And one way we should be thankful for the tears that we shed. Have you ever thought about that? They prepare us for a clearer vision of God. Our tears prepare us for a clearer vision of God. And it's when we're really hurting that we find out how much we need God. Do you need God this evening? Every one of us needs God. You might need him in a different way. For example, you might need him to forgive you of your sins by being washed in the watery grave of baptism. That is, you've never been baptized, and you need him this evening in that way. What a beautiful commitment that would be to make. What a wonderful thing that would be. And then I talked about the concern and the care that Christians can give to one another. You may need God in the sense that you need the brothers and sisters of University Oaks to pray with you. You may be going through a hard time. I don't know what problem you're having, but I'll guarantee you if I suddenly said I want a light bulb to go on over the head of everybody who has a big problem here this evening, how many light bulbs do y'all think there would be? Everybody would have a spotlight shining on them. Everybody would. Your problem may not be my problem. Mine may be different from yours. But I know we're wrestling with them. If we can help you in some way, we'd invite you to step forward while we stand and sing.